As we talked about on Friday night's show, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is a law that is a wartime law in this country. It's used during wartime only. The last time it was used was during World War II, when it was used to put Japanese Americans in internment camps, something for which the U.S. government later apologized and paid reparations under Ronald Reagan. Nevertheless, in an unannounced written statement this weekend, Donald Trump claimed that that was the law he would use as the basis for deporting people who he determined to be members of a Venezuelan gang. He would use that law to deport people immediately, without any due process or any legal consideration at all. Organizations, including the ACLU, sued immediately to block him from using that 1700s law. The chief judge of the Washington, D.C. Federal District Court held an emergency hearing on the ACLU's lawsuit late Saturday afternoon. And at that hearing, the ACLU's lawyer, Lee Gelernt, told that judge that it was his understanding that planes were about to take off, or possibly had taken off during the hearing, carrying hundreds of men out of this country toward a prison in El Salvador. There was a Trump administration lawyer there representing the government. That lawyer said he couldn't give the judge any information about that at all. So again, this was an emergency hearing late on Saturday, and the judge ended up basically saying, listen, there are difficult questions of law here, and these are going to have to be worked out in the courts. For now, I am blocking the Trump administration from deporting people under this law from the 1700s. They are blocked from using this law as the basis for these deportations until we can hash out these legal questions. So the judge actually said to the Trump administration lawyer, quote, "You shall inform your clients," meaning inform the Trump administration, "of this immediately. You should inform them that any plane containing these folks that's going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States. Those people need to be returned to the United States." Quote, "This is something that you need to make sure is complied with immediately." By all appearances, that order was not complied with immediately. NBC News reports that 2 flights carrying these men were in transit when the judge issued his ruling, but they did not turn around. They continued on their way. The Washington Post reports that a 3rd plane was still on the ground at the time of that ruling. It hadn't taken off in Texas until after that judge's ruling had been issued. The next morning, the pro-Trump president of El Salvador announced that his country had accepted 238 men from the United States. He posted a slickly produced 3-minute propaganda video of some of these men being sort of manhandled and pushed around, and all of them having their heads shaved by armed Salvadoran military or security forces. President Trump happily posted the video as well. The president of El Salvador says these men will be jailed in a massive prison in his country for as many years as the U.S. wants to pay him to keep them there. They have not been charged with crimes and thereby sentenced to serve this time. They're just being locked up indefinitely at the pleasure of El Salvador. At the White House press briefing today, Trump's press secretary listed all the crimes these men ostensibly committed, but a senior Trump administration official tells NBC News that these men have not necessarily been convicted of any of these crimes. Still, though, they're in prison now in El Salvador indefinitely, having been disappeared out of this country with no process whatsoever. We don't even know who these guys are. They keep saying they're Venezuelan gang members. We don't even know if they're Venezuelans, let alone gang members. Unsurprisingly, the federal judge who held that hearing on Saturday, where he made it abundantly clear that nobody was supposed to be sent to El Salvador, he called a new hearing today to assess whether the Trump administration had knowingly violated his court order. Quote, "A federal judge pressed a Justice Department lawyer today over why the Trump administration did not comply with his order to temporarily halt deportations under an 18th century law, and asked why key information about the flights was being withheld over the weekend. In a tense hearing, the judge summarized the administration's position on his court order Saturday as, quote, "We don't care, we'll do what we want." The Trump administration lawyer at this evening's hearing still refused to provide any information about the flights. And so the judge has now ordered another hearing for tomorrow at noon, at which the Trump administration must give him the information he wants or explain the legal rationale for why they are not giving it to him. And if they don't, then, well, then. Hanging in the balance immediately is the fate of untold numbers of people who Donald Trump may try to send to this Salvadoran prison. The president of El Salvador has said openly that he'd be happy to put U.S. citizens there too. But also hanging in the balance is whether the Trump administration is considering not just trying to wheedle their way out of it, but whether they're considering openly flouting a court order, which is a very fast trip down a very short street in terms of how much of a republic we still are.